Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Town of Osoyoos Committee of the Whole on Monday, May the 1st, 2017, 9 a.m. in Council Chambers. Introduction of late items? No, nothing? So could we have the agenda adopted as read? Thank you, Councillor Rhodes, Councillor Youngberg. All in favor? Thanks. And we have one delegation today, and it's our solid waste management plan presentation by Cameron Bond, who is the RDOS solid waste management coordinator. So thank you, Cameron, for coming and talking to us today.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council, for having me, staff as well. My name is Cameron. I'm with the Regional District. I was here a few months ago, to discuss CART programming, so I can certainly discuss that. Our RFP, request for proposal, is currently out there. We have proponents, several proponents that are looking at that right now. Today I'm going to be discussing the organics, a study that we did, and the amendment to our solid waste management plan that affects the town of Osoyoos. So you just click on that through it if you want. That's okay. So the regional district has a solid waste management plan. It's a document that the province requires for all regional districts. We updated ours in 2012. It's a very powerful document in terms of allowing for elector assent, but does require a full public consultation to allow us to amend that document. The main goals of the amendment are to cite a regional compost site, and that regional compost site would be capable of taking in residential organics, commercial food waste, yard waste, potentially wastewater treatment sludge, and wood waste. So a very large facility, and we have all the bells and whistles needed to keep odor to a minimum at that site. That's one of our key goals. What we also found, looking specifically at the Osoyoos landfill, was the potential for local incorporation and composting of residential-only food waste. So we found that residential food waste coming in with yard waste, and the volumes of yard waste is significant in this area, and especially in the community of the town of Osoyoos. You actually reduce the odor quite significantly. And so we did odor analysis of a term windrow concept at the Osoyoos landfill. We're actually looking at the Oliver landfill, specifically for our amendment, because we found that the Osoyoos landfill has a desert center. It has $1 million homes along the lake, and even though these feasibility studies show the potential, there's less risk at the Oliver landfill. And so, as the group, as we discussed with all of our Osoyoos, some of our Osoyoos staff and our team at the RDOS, we felt the Oliver landfill might be a better place to deal with large volumes of residential food waste. We're also discussing the carts, and that was a previous presentation, as I mentioned. So certainly if you have any questions on the CART program, please let me know. And then lastly, we've been discussing major capital upgrades at the Campbell Mountain landfill specifically. We're spending millions of dollars there. And it's not a part of this presentation, but if you have any questions, please let me know. So this is just a reminder of our CART-based programming. There really is no set way of collecting organics. What generally happens is you can just click all the way through if you like. It's time to stop. One more. Yeah. So if you look at these different options, we're not required to have carts to provide a collection of organics. We might still provide a smaller cart, and these are handheld carts that the drivers can lift. Some places also have carts which are semi-automated. That would be perfectly fine for our present system. And if we do go for carts, there is the example of the city of Vancouver there, where they mix their yard waste and food waste together, which might be an example for the town of Osoyoos as well. We don't know how we're going to collect organics, to be honest. Certainly when we looked at the feasibility study, it showed that the collection of yard waste and food waste together would probably be the best. It would allow us to bring in the materials as the cheapest for collection, certainly, because we'd only have you wouldn't really change the yard waste collection that much. We'd move the yard waste collection to every week yard waste collection with food waste, and then we'd alternate between garbage and recycling. But the collection of the materials would be the same, especially if we use split body trucks, as we currently are. And that split body truck allows for 2 commodities to be collected in the same vehicle at one time. So depending on how the trucks go, we don't know exactly how we're going to be able to collect that material, whether we go to carts or not. But what I'm showing here is that it's not really essential for us to make that decision based on organics. It's more essential for us to make that decision based on how we collect materials currently. And that's the goal of our request for proposals that's out now. So in 2012, it did ask us to start diverting materials from landfills, especially food waste. It also looked at how we can better treat yard waste and wastewater treatment sludge. Town of Osoyoos has an excellent yard waste turn windrow system. it's an example that I use, and it's actually present on this when I do these town hall meetings. What we're looking at with the term windrow is a very simple approach to yard waste, which we have a lot of. We generate it from homes, some businesses, landscapers, and you guys already have a pretty good system. But other communities don't, and Penticton, Oliver, they don't really have a term windrow system that's very effective for different reasons. So this is what we were tasked to look at, is how can we increase those already existing services and make them even better. So we looked at 18 sites, and mainly we're looking for a regional compost site at that time. We narrowed that down to 6. We did some feasibility studies, odor modeling, and then we got down to 2, and I'll be presenting on those 2 today. What we did find was that one site is definitely better than multiple sites in terms of commercial food waste and wastewater treatment sludge. There was some leeway in terms of treating residential food waste because you have more options because it doesn't stink as much. But certainly the wastewater treatment sludge and the commercial food waste need to go to one facility according to our feasibility study. As well, we found that wastewater treatment sludge treated separately but on the same facility would probably be the best way of treating odor and getting the best price for that material, apples being apples. Wastewater treatment sludge right now is a lot of open areas. We either have term windrow in Summerland, or we have aerated static pile in Penticton. Odor is associated with both of these facilities, so finding a better way to deal with that odor, and by increasing the volume coming to a site by spending more money, but actually in the end, we hope reduce costs while increasing the amount of odor control. So the odor control technologies that came forward were essentially in-vessel composting. And what we found was there's 2 main in-vessel composting styles in BC right now. One is a membrane system. It's where you use a Gore-Tex jacket like this. It's the same sort of material. You cover the compost pile inside a building. The pile, what happens in the Gore-Tex is it actually builds up a biofilm that eats odor as it comes through. So odor has a lot of trouble escaping from the facility. And then you encase it inside another building as well. And that really traps the odor inside, and you can bring that through odor control technologies called biocovers. And so you can have different methods of that. The other one is more like this room. All the oxygen, all the air, all the odor is controlled within the room, and it can be brought out to a system that can then deal with the odor. So we found that by doing these in-vessel systems, we were able to get very good odor control technologies. When we did our feasibility studies, we looked specifically at more of a moderate control. We found for both of our regional sites, we'd have to have very high control of odor. So our feasibility studies are helpful in terms of assessing sites, but our main goal now is to put forward a site that would meet the best odor control technologies. But we haven't determined the technology yet, and that will be once we acquire a site, once we lease the land, we're looking at leasing either site, we would then have the ability to then go to tender and tender design, build, and potentially operate scenario where these companies that are already existing in British Columbia could come in with a good track record and actually build the right facility for the right amount of volume of waste coming in. So this term windrow, this is the Suez landfill pictured there. So what we're looking at there is the potential to add residential-only food scraps. The reason we wanted to look at this potential is because your trucks, as they run through the community, are split trucks. So if we start collecting organics, it would probably be easier for them to drop off their materials at a local area. And when you look at Oliver and Osoyoos, you see that they're fairly close together in terms of how the trucks generally come from the Penticton area. They could access Oliver or Osoyoos quite easily. They would drop garbage off continually at the Osoyoos landfill, but that would go to every other week collection. And then they would drop off their organics at another location. They would also then collect the recycling every other week as well. So having some more options, and we don't have to go one way or another right now, but we can look at the options on the table, and having more options seems to be a way to save money. And I'll explain we can actually save money in terms of processing costs too, which is something that's important as well. And again, commercial materials will go to a centralized facility. We just can't handle it locally for a decent price. So odor modeling, the best way to describe odor modeling is they have a room full of testers, 6 to 10 people, and they give them different potencies of odor. And so this is done at laboratories across North America, across Europe, across Australia. And they smell these odors, and when 50% of the people in the room can smell it, like actually detect it, that's 1 odor unit. It then goes up to 5 odor units. That would be where most people in the room could smell it, but it would be just a fairly faint odor. And then 10 odor units is where it's distinct. You could actually tell what it is and potentially where it's coming from. So just to give you an idea, Some of the compost facilities in BC run up to 50 units, odor units at their boundary. A lot of that has to do with the distance between them and the closest receptor, which is a home or a school or a park. So we want to make sure, what our goal of this whole project is to have 5 odor units maximum at our property boundary. And that would be, for us, a minimum standard that we would have to meet or have our contractors meet if they're going to be running the facility. And this is the Osoyoos landfill, and this was taken in terms of looking at residential food waste only. And what you can sort of see here is, to give you the road, this is the road that goes up to the landfill. The desert center is in a blue star there. And that gives you the idea that generally, if you take in just electoral area A food waste and a town of Osoyoos residential food waste, then what you'd find is that you have the potential to operate a facility there with very minimal concerns for your local residents. When we looked at that, that's excellent, but there is higher risk at the Osoyoos landfill versus the Oliver landfill. And if we're going to do it someplace in terms of risk and reward, the Oliver landfill might be the better place to do it. No decisions being made in any of this. This is just when we do the solid waste management planning process, the idea is to put forward a plan to allow for as many different scenarios as possible. So when the rubber hits the road and you start to see where things are going, you have those options in place. So we're discussing this. And when I had my meeting in Osoyoos last week, we discussed this with the residents that were there. So we're not trying to hide the fact that this is potential, but certainly the Oliver landfill is our preferred approach at the staff level. So when you look at the pricing here, the idea of this pricing, the red circled lines, is that centralized site saves you money, and this is price per ton. So it's working out how much the facility would cost, how much everything would cost, and then you build that into a price per the amount of tonnage that's going to come to those facilities. What we see is in smaller sites you have less volume, so you still have to build a lot of bells and whistles to deal with commercial food waste. So you do have to spend a lot of money. So when these feasibility studies were done, they showed that there's a higher cost for smaller sites and a lower cost for larger sites. And it does kind of make sense in terms of economies of scale. If you have the same or similar infrastructure at both sites, the site with the larger volume coming in will be a lower cost per ton because there's more fixed costs that you can then put over that larger tonnage. As well, we looked at the term windrow concept, and Osoyoos already has spent about $100,000, $110,000 on an area to capture leachate. So you guys actually have a pad on there, and you guys have water on site. Some of the benefits of that facility are already kind of embedded in there. So you do get a very low price, and that is an option that the town of Osoyoos might want to consider, is upgrading. You would have to upgrade the facility to allow for the drop-off of that food waste from the residential collection vehicles. But once it's incorporated into the pile, it's one way you guys could potentially save costs, is to look at doing that through the town of Osoyoos landfill, or working with the town of Oliver, or the Oliver landfill through the regional district, and doing a co-siting there for residential-only facility. So in terms of compost fees, what the feasibility is showing is that yard waste is going to be a lot cheaper. Therefore, your cost per ton is going to be around $85, and that's kind of an industry goal for us, is to sort of hit that $85 mark. We can't say we're going to do it, but that's certainly a goal of ours. We want to keep our food waste cheaper than garbage, and if we found that where it's most successful is where there's a savings, and that really encourages people to remove their food waste and take it to the facility rather than throw it in the garbage and potentially saving money. So we wouldn't really recommend an organics approach that was more expensive than garbage. It doesn't make any sense. So on the return on investment, we're hoping to get food waste down to 85. Yard waste would be significantly cheaper, but still costs money. And then the wastewater treatment sludge we're seeing from Penticton, Summerland, and Karameus would be charged more per wet ton. And that would probably be like $110, $120 per metric tons. And then we're looking at groups like the Central Okanagan Regional District, which has a problem in West Kelowna. They're currently shipping their materials out, and I'm just guessing, but they're hundreds of $200-$300 per metric ton to dispose of their wastewater treatment sludge now. So there may be the option of working with them at the facility if there's a potential for that. So working with players outside the regional district is also something we're considering to help us save money, because even if they bring it in at $150, we could still that could still help us in terms of running our facility, and that's one option we're also going to consider. So the Grand Forks, when in your package there, I think I saw you guys have that study, and that study was done, I think, through the BC government, and it kind of shows you the benefits of what Grand Forks has done. Grand Forks is a similar sized community to the South Okanagan. What they do now is they collect food scraps from residences. They bring it to their Grand Forks landfill. They turn windrow compost it, very similar to what's happening in Seuss right now. They then take that material and they're saving it for the end of life. So they're able to look at their landfill and say, hey, we need cover material to close the landfill, and they're building that cover material on site, which is pretty innovative in a way to save money, because finding topsoil, as you know, topsoil isn't free. Good topsoil that you want to cover a landfill with, they're making their own topsoil. So it's a pretty innovative, intelligent design. Odor has not been an issue from what I understand. And the case study kind of explains some of the costs associated with the collection bins as well as the collection itself. A lot of that cost would already be embedded into the operations of your landfill already. Oliver landfill does have a turn windrow system, so a lot of those costs are embedded in there already. So you're not adding a lot of extra costs for operational costs, maybe a few capital upgrades to make sure the food waste comes in with minimal odor, but you actually then have those options in place. So the Seuss landfill, just as an example, you guys have those options there because you've already got those benefits in place. But again, the Oliver landfill is sort of where we fell on as staff, mainly because if anything goes wrong at your Seuss landfill, you've got a lot of amenities and million-dollar homes along along Seuss Lake. And so you have some high risk there if any odor does hit those areas. We know that with the Kelowna compost facility that's based near Predator Ridge in Vernon, it's $1 million homes that are miles away, but odor can travel down, sort of, it can, especially in the cold inversions, follows cold air drainages. And if there's a home at the bottom of that cold air drainage, you could smell it. But if you walk 10 meters above that ridge, you don't smell it at all. So it kind of condenses and moves down there, especially in the wintertime when we have inversions. When you see the lake freeze, when you see the lake very calm and there's that low cloud above us, there's very little air movement, and that's the highest concern for odor. And if you went back to that map, and that's the outer range of that odor over a 10-minute period in 1 year, so it's a very sensitive analysis, that outer range would definitely be December, January, February, and in the evening or at night when there's very little air movement and the air is getting colder and making those odors travel down those cold air draws. And that's one of our concerns and one of the reasons we looked at those very tightly for our siting criteria. So the Oliver landfill, what we found there is there's very few homes around there. There's one home at our entryway. I'm not sure what they're going to do with it because that home is sold, but that's fairly close to us. We would look at placing the organic site as you enter the facility on the left-hand side. It's now becoming a winery. It was a feedlot for a while, our neighbor. So we feel it's a good buffer area between us and homes. So there's some potential there for us to site a food waste only turn windrow composting system there in the Oliver landfill. And if anything goes wrong, which can happen in any facility, then our neighbors are far enough away we think the odor would be pretty minimal. Again, the main time of year is the winter time. Most of the year it's very windy in both the Seuss and Oliver. When it's windy, you don't have an odor condition because it spreads the odor. But when you do have that low air movement, that's really the concern. So winter time is really the problem time that we're going to see if we have odors at any of our facilities. So this is the Marin Valley Road site that we're looking at. Marin Valley Road is, if you come up from Caledon on Highway 3A, so if you go by the way station there and come up the hill, you're probably coming up about, I think, 5-6 kilometers maybe. And then on your right-hand side, there's a plateau before you hit Twin Lakes, and that's Marin Valley Road. About a kilometer in from Highway 3A. And it's a site that the Lokati owners, they're part of the Penticton Indian Band, they were approached by the Penticton Indian Band Development Corporation, very similar to the Suyas Indian Band Development Corporation. And the band corporation there felt that this was one of the sites that they think was a good idea. For us, we understand that because it's mainly affecting residents in the regional district area, so their band members won't be affected by any odor. But it's also land that these Lokatis were interested in leasing for the last decade or so. So this might be a potential for them to look at having some value for their land because as they can lease it for 50 to 100-year leases. So we're looking at that. The main issue that we see there is odor. There's about 15 to 30 homes in and around that area that in our very sensitive odor analysis, which is 10 minutes per year, we found that at least some of the sites may be impacted by more than 5 odor units at any time for over a 10-minute period during the year. The closest site, as a crow flies, is about 8.5 odor units for about 1 hour in the year. So we see that the the actual be over 5 odor units for about 3 hours in the year. So we do see that we can't really affect our neighbors. It's their property, and we don't want to make any negative nuisances for their property. So we would feel that for that siting, we would have to have very strong odor control. Other issues we're seeing is transportation in there. It's a dirt road, and the local residents don't want extra noise or dirt. So we will be having a meeting on May 10th in Caledon to discuss that with local property owners. We've identified the areas, the properties that we think might be impacted. We've sent them letters. And as with the town of Vesuvius, we've sent newsletters out to that local area as well. So we do know there's a number of concerns for that site. The next site is the Summerland landfill. And so that Summerland landfill has the best odor control. So what we're seeing is that there's very few homes above the landfill. So if you've ever driven Summerland Princeton Road or Princeton Summerland Road, it connects from Summerland all the way to Princeton. It's a beautiful rural road. There's a community called Falder. It's unincorporated, just above Summerland. We are looking at just right by the landfill. You can see on the yellow hatch portion there. So we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. The area, though, residents are concerned mainly about transportation. The Prairie Valley Road, it's about 7 kilometers, does pass through a school zone, and we're looking at about 20 to 25 extra vehicles traveling through that area. So in Summerland, we're meeting on May 17th for their open house to discuss some of these issues with local residents. And so there is some concerns there, mainly for transportation, but also for odor, as the existing Summerland Turn-Windrow compost site has in the past created problems for people in Prairie Valley Road, which is the area to the right. We're hoping to be far enough to the west to actually be in the Trout Creek airshed. So our main concern there is the Kettle Valley Railway Station. But we feel through the odor modeling that we're doing, we wouldn't impact those, even the wintertime operations for the Kettle Valley Railway. So we feel this is the best for odor, but it is a longer distance. So when you look at the costs, total cost per ton to get the materials on site, you see that there's an extra $2 to drive it to Summerland, but you save those $2 because you have an existing scale, existing heavy equipment, existing water. So there's a lot of things there that are very beneficial, but when you look at the feasibility studies, they're almost matched, dollar to dollar. The GHG emissions are slightly lower for the Marin Valley site because there's less driving, of course, but when you look at the actual GHG savings from this site, the regional site, and existing, if potentially Turn-Windrow operations, we're about 3,500 to 4,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions equivalent per annum by diverting that organics from the landfill and moving it to composting. So there's a huge savings there, where the difference in terms of transportation seemed to be about 40 to 50 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. So on the scale of the benefit, it's not a huge difference. So what we're doing now is bringing this forward to public consultation. We're bringing this forward to all the councils in the affected communities. I'm speaking to Penticton tomorrow. I'm speaking to Karamias in the near future. I've already spoken to Summerland, Oliver, the board, our regional district board, and Princeton as well. So this is one of our public consultation goals. We met in Vesuvius last week. I'll be meeting in Oliver tonight. I'll be talking to 2 communities near Armada and West Bench near Penticton, and then I'll be in Karamias this week as well. So it's a busy time of year. We'll be discussing the same issue, basically the same presentation that I'm discussing with you, but allowing for people to also ask questions about carts, which was a big issue for us in OK Falls, a lot of questions about carts. And mainly the cart issue that I'm seeing from our public consultation is mobile home parks and stratas that have very tight areas for the trucks to get in and out of. So those are the people that are coming forward saying they have concerns. General households that have nice clear frontage, curbs, where they can place their materials, I'm hearing less concerns, unless there's front street parking and cul-de-sacs. And speaking to some of the contractors, that is one of their concerns. And how they dealt with it in Penticton was basically case by case. But we are hearing a lot of positive things about carts, but we're also hearing concerns. And those will be addressed and brought to you through your staff as part of our public consultation process. We have a survey available right now, and residents are asked to fill in that survey to give their impression of what they believe carts would be for right or wrong for their property. Also discussing what they're currently putting out there in terms of their curbside materials now. And then we're also looking at any feedback on the organic siting, and we have an email set up for that, and they can also contact us by mail, fax. So any information from the public, if you have any friends or family or people that you know in the community that want to contact us and give their opinion, we certainly are looking for that. We'll probably be closing the survey near the middle or end of May, just so the information can be provided to councils and to our board to let them know what their local residents are thinking about carts and the organics project. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Cameron. At the RDOS, Cameron talks exactly the same way, and he does it without notes. He's an amazing a wealth of knowledge. So we absolutely appreciate everything that you've done. And I did explain to you that 3 of us were at Silga last week, which is why we were not at the public hearing. I just had one question. On the, where you're comparing the price per ton, the Oliver landfill is 3 times more than if we had it in Esuya. So why would we even consider going with Oliver if it was going to cost us so much less to have it in Esuya?
Yeah, if you look at the Oliver landfill, that includes all commercial food waste. And so to speak to that, that feasibility study looked at taking in commercial food waste and any other materials in the Oliver and Area C area. And once you get commercial food waste involved, you have to have odor control. You can't use the simplified turn windrow technology.
Okay.
So we're looking there at more of a gore cover system or an in-vessel system based just for the residents for Area C and town of Oliver. And when you look at that, when you have the bells and whistles, it costs a lot more money. I could have put in the Esuya one, it would have been exactly the same almost, because you have similar size of residents and you generate similar amount of waste. So when you look at putting in the 2 technologies we looked at are both called in-vessel systems, where you cover the mass of compost. Then those systems cost a lot more money. Whereas the turn windrow system, we look specifically at your system in Esuya because you have a very good system. You have a very good yard waste system that produces very good quality compost. So there's really, if we could, what we wanted to see is if we could add a little bit more capital, like a building to receive the materials, make sure it's sorted properly, brought out there, so we minimize that odor. How much would that cost? And when we ran the analysis, it becomes quite cost effective. Okay. A larger site in Oliver would be similar technology to what's operational in Esuya now. So we wouldn't change your current system, but the food waste, there would potentially be less residential yard waste coming to your facility. And then the residential yard waste and food waste would come to potentially the Oliver facility. Okay. But we want to put this out there because there's those 2 options on the table. But at the staff level, certainly, we just saw that the amenities around the Esuya landfill are much higher than the Oliver landfill, and those mean complaints. And if you're going to run a facility for composting in BC, odor has been the #1 issue. Yeah. Transportation has been #2. So those are 2 issues that we focused in on in terms of our analysis. And when you look at risk to reward, the Oliver landfill may be the better spot just because it's further away from homes.
Good. Thank you. And when are you going to be making a decision on the 2 major issues, Marin or Summerland, and this? Is it sometime within the next year, or do we not know that yet?
In terms of decision making, what I would do is we'd probably run in camera because it's basically a 50-year lease. It's a purchase of land essentially. Yeah. So we would work then through the board and potential councils as well. Okay. The 2 things that we need to do before we make a final decision, or at least the final signature on any lease, is to create a local service area establishment bylaw. And we would be asking communities that would like to have their materials brought to that facility to sign that bylaw. In terms of the cost of the facility, we would look also at potentially taking on the debt of the facility, where that debt would be amortized through the bringing in of the tipping fees. So we would look at it be a tipping fee-based facility, but there would be debt associated with it that would have to go through the local service area. So if the town of Esuya decided to become a signatory to that local service area, we would then be the taxation authority through the regional district, but you guys would be able to have your voice and opinion on that service as it moves forward as part of that local service area. So, and that's what we do for a lot of these services. Right now, I'm here for the solid waste management program, which is a regional service. We also have sub-regional services like our mosquito control program. So similar to that, we would be essentially having certain parties in the regional district come on board that. So when the rubber hits the road really is when, for town councils, when you decide there's enough trust in the regional district to move forward on signing that document to allow us to then form the local service area establishment bylaw. Once that's signed, we have then the authority to enter into a lease and to enter into debt. So that process would probably be a year-long process. Okay. The solid waste management process is part of that. What we're doing now is we're trying to get the elector approval, so we don't have to go to AAP or referendum on this. Okay. The solid waste management, this is we're not going around anything. This is the process for solid waste, is to do this kind of public consultation in discussion with councils, board, and the public. And once that's approved by the Ministry of Environment, which we assume it will be, because this is really taking the next step, what we've already identified in our solid waste management plan. We've already said we're going to do this. It's just now the rubber's hitting the road. We're going to figure out a site. But once that's decided, then we'll have to negotiate the lease. We'll have to do the local area service establishment bylaw, and that will take time. So in terms of when the first materials will enter there, I'm saying 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Youngberg, you had a question?
Thanks, Mayor McCordoff. Just a very interesting question. Where do all of the vineyards and orchards dump their waste now? For an example, I see bins of apples and pears and all that sort of stuff going. I don't know where it goes.
Yeah. There is some landfill shopping on that material we see, because there's different rates at the Eustis landfill and Oliver landfill. Mm-hmm. So we do see them coming from different communities to our different landfills, depending on what they're bringing in, what the price is. What we're seeing right now is a lot of the grape hummus is being treated on site. We're not seeing a lot of that at our facility, but we do see a lot of fruit calls. And I think that's probably some of the angriest calls we get is when we do charge people for that fruit call. I think our rate is like $5 a metric ton, but even some of the growers are saying that's too much. So we're seeing some of that coming in, but it's pulse-based. Some years it's really low, sometimes it's very high. And cherries is one that can come through, and then other fruit. So we're seeing a lot of that coming through, but we're not seeing a lot of the vineyard waste so far. A lot of the vineyard operations are running their own compost sites, especially larger ones.
So would that go into the food waste? If this plan were to succeed, would they take it all over to the food waste?
In general, we would look at agricultural waste as separate,
Oh.
mainly because you don't want to have a high cost for the growers. So you want to keep it as simple as possible and turn windrow technology in general with enough yard waste would be fine for grape hummus and for cherries and other fruit. That's what we're presently doing here and at the Oliver landfill. So when we get those materials in, we see that the turn windrow technology is efficient and it doesn't create much odor. So I wouldn't want to send them to the food waste facility where they're spending more per ton, unless they had to go there. So that might be like restaurant waste from some of the restaurants. Mm-hmm. Like if they're not composting that on site, they would probably have to go to the because it's commercial.
And stuff like that.
Commercial food waste, yeah. So we would have to look at that case by case. So depending on how it's mixed in, especially cooked foods, we'd want that to go to the regional facility rather than a local facility, looking at the pricing from the feasibility studies.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Romanko.
A couple of questions, Cameron. Are there grants available to set up the composting sites?
From my awareness, there's certainly federal monies that are associated with these kind of sites. They're not full grants, though. They're generally part grant and part loan. Looking at the savings, because I compared their potential interest rates versus, what's the one in BC that we usually borrow from?
Municipal Finance Board.
Yeah. So looking at them, municipal finance has a lower interest rate, but when you bring the grant in, it actually ends up saving you a bit of money. So it's certainly something we should look at. Other grants may be applicable. Gas tax might be one as well. And there might be specific grants as the federal government and provincial government look at their programs. We're a little bit far out to say that we could be applying for grants right now. We need to have the site located, and we need to have a commitment in terms of technology, I believe, before we can commit to applying too early for grants. This is my conversation with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We're definitely on the radar of these groups as well, because I've sort of talked to them, and we've already got funding. Our feasibility study was financed in part by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and they're very interested in continuation of that funding. But we need to have more detail before we're willing to bring forward the millions of dollars we might need.
Okay. My second question relates to kind of the management of food waste at the household level. And we talked about this at our meetings, the heat, summer storage, things like that. Is it possible to work in like a compostable bag system within the to handle the food waste? Something that deteriorates, or is it going to have to be just fresh in the yard waste? Because I know a lot of people are going to complain about having to wash their units out, all that type of waste. Is that possible? Some type of...
Well, there's two things to look at. One is you can't use a liner unless you use brown paper liner and make it organic. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing is about the term windrow system, if you just take residential food waste, you would be OMRI compliant. So you could make an OMRI certified organic material. I'm being a bit loose in the language. The language is very precise because organic is defined under regulations, and so it's OMRI certified. It's what they call it. There's other certification bodies as well that would allow you to get higher value from that compost. And we're finding that the higher value organic compost is being shipped to the Smilk community in Okanagan already at very high prices. So if we can make it locally, that might be something to look at. If you're not going for that certification, though, you can use newspaper or other liners, and that would be preferred to a plastic liner. There really is no plastic liners that meet the criteria for term windrow. They need high heat and a very industrial process to break down so-called biodegradable plastics. There is no certification for biodegradable, degradable, compostable, so those terms can be applied quite loosely. And if you look at their packaging, they send you to a website which explains, well, yeah, if you have 8 weeks in a certain type of process, this material will break down. Well, that's not what the consumer thinks. So generally, what communities are doing now is moving away from plastics, and if they're going to allow for a liner, they would use newspaper, which is generally free, or brown paper, which is you can purchase and line your bins with it. What I found, because I home compost, and I home compost everything because I have a green cone, is the materials themselves are not that hard to deal with. It is an ick factor for many people. I'm not denying that. But in general, if you use a plastic bucket that you can pour out, it's not so bad. And if you do want to line it, if we decide not to go organic, we can recommend newspaper, which is what Grand Forks does. And actually have a little video on how to make a little paper bucket using newspaper. So it depends on really what if you really want to go organic and you can make an extra $20 a metric ton, which is what we're seeing, then maybe that's where you go and you just let people know, hey, keep it in the freezer. You do have to wash out your buckets once in a while. But if the $20 per ton, which is significant, is really what you want, or if you want to make organic materials for local growers, which is also something that the local agricultural community said, then maybe that's the direction you want to go, and you can't use any liners except for the brown paper liners, which is now currently acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rhodes.
Well, thanks, Cameron. You're so thorough with your presentations, it's always hard to come up with questions afterwards. But our landfill, I'm wondering when you were doing the evaluations if you did any kind of odor testing at our landfill. We've always had a concern about the odors affecting the desert center down there. But if my memory tells me, I think that's because of the liquid ponds that were just like right across the access road there, and not so much from our landfill. And I'm wondering if you did any evaluation on the actual landfill site as opposed to those liquid areas there.
No. The odor modeling we did was specific to additions of a new composting system. We did look at the existing yard waste system to get a baseline, and like we showed, there's almost no odor from that yard waste system. It's just not producing odor, maybe minimal, one odor unit, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's not unpleasant anyway.
No, but yeah, we didn't look at the septic receiving stations, because the Campbell Mountain landfill, when I first started there, we had a septic receiving beds, and that was the main source of odor for us. I know Summerland's having the same issue because they have septic receiving beds. So yeah, those are definitely a high source of odor. And a well-run landfill, as yours is, I would say can be a source of odor, but it's generally because of the practices that we're using now to cover the waste as soon as we're done operations at the end of the day. Most landfills now are not a huge source of odor, though there can be, depending on, odor is subjective, and that's why the odor units is used with 10 people and half of them smell it, because people smell odors very differently. So it's trying to get an average understanding of what these odors are. So for some people it might not be noticeable, so for some people it could be the worst smell they've ever smelled. And it is, and what we're also finding, and this is for any facility, once people think there's a smell, they smell it. And so one of our main goals is don't create the odor in the first place. Kelowna, when they ran their facility in near Predator Ridge up near Vernon, they had a lot of odors in the first months, and that killed their goodwill with the local property owners. We're taking odor incredibly seriously because we know that if we don't get those property owners on side, we've lost them, and it might take decades to get their trust back. So we're really focused in on trying to reduce odors from the get-go.
Okay.
So, but in terms of the facility, no, I can't speak to that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Cameron. It's been it's very interesting, and I know you could probably tell us a lot more, but we have a couple other things on the agenda. So thank you very much for coming, and we will continue to listen to updates on this for the next while. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And the information, like I said, should be available through staff near the end of May.
Good.
And that will help with your decision making for the RFP process, which is
Okay.
very important for all of us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on our list is the South Okanagan Transit. That would be Miss Van Vienen.
Thank you. At the March 20th, 2017 regular open meeting of Council, Council resolved to assign to the RDOS the rights and responsibilities of the agreements with the BC Transit for the operation of the South Okanagan Transit System. Local government partners of transit services in the South Okanagan-Similkameen met several times to discuss the regionalization of the systems, as well as amalgamating the Rider's Guide into one guide and providing a standard fare rate. The integration is a recommendation under the Transit Future Plan and is the first step in delivering a regional service with increased frequency. It will be also provide better interregional service with more access for local services into main centres like Penticton and potentially Kelowna, and minimizing duplication of services while achieving efficiencies to benefit taxpayers. This report is to update Council on the progress to date of the regionalization scheme. The proposed implementation date for the Regional Riders Guide is July 1st, 2017. This new Riders Guide will include all transit services in the South Okanagan-Similkameen and will include a 1-800 number for riders to contact and be redirected to their appropriate service. This will assist all riders in finding connections when they arrive in different transit areas. It is hoped that this will lead to better use of all the transit services and make connections easier for everyone. Along with the new Rider's Guide, a proposed new fare structure will take effect. These fares were presented to Council in an earlier report. The changes to the Rider's Guide and the fare structure will be advertised through newspapers throughout the service areas, including Oseas. There will also be media advisories sent out. Further information will be provided to Council as we near the July 1st implementation date, and this report is just being presented for information.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to know that after all your hard work and dealing with this, that it looks like we might have something in place that works better than what we've had. So thank you very much. Do we need to approve that report or accept the report? No, we're okay. So that's, did you? Oh, you were going to move what we need to do is adjourn the meeting, and I assume that Councillor King has...
You got somewhere you got to be, man?
Yeah. And Councillor Campbell has seconded that. All in favor? Thank you. So do we need a minute or two? I see. Were you interested in that, in what you heard about